Thank you. Well, the time has come to make some history, to make a turning point in history, because there is no alternative. We have a military force, naval and others, stationed off the Indian Ocean region, which, contrary to all nonsense from some idiots in the U.S. community, is a preparation for Cheney to unleash war against Iran in terms of a massive air attack. You don't move B-52s into that area. You don't move 4 task forces into that area. You don't do the other things that are being done unless you're prepared while Congress is away to launch war. The consequences of launching a war are unbelievable. It would be a different form of World War III. You could not put this back in the bottle. Too many things are unstable. First of all, this occurs at a time where the world monetary financial system is actually now currently in the process of disintegrating. Nothing mysterious about this. I've talked about it for some time. It's been in progress. It's not abating. What's listed as stock values and market values in the financial markets internationally is bunk. These are purely fictitious beliefs. There's no truth to it. The fakery is enormous. There is no possibility of a non-collapse of the present financial system. None. It's finished now. The present financial system cannot continue to exist under any circumstances, under any presidency, under any leadership, or any leadership of nations. Only a fundamental and sudden change in the world monetary financial system will prevent a general, immediate, chain reaction type of collapse. At what speed, we don't know, but it will go on, and it will be unstoppable. And the longer it goes on, before coming to an end, the worse things will get. And there is no one in the present institutions of government who is competent to deal with this. The Congress, the Senate, the House of Representatives is not currently competent to deal with this. And if the Congress goes on recess and leaves Cheney free, then you might be kissing the United States and much more goodbye by September. This is the month of August. It's the anniversary of August 1914. It's the anniversary of August 1939. The condition now is worse, objectively, than on either of those 2 occasions. Either we can make a fundamental change in the policies of the United States government now, or you may be kissing civilization goodbye for some time to come. That's the reality. Anyone who thinks differently is either just an incompetent or an idiot or a raving lunatic. That's reality. Are you prepared to act now? If you're not prepared to act, please leave the House of Representatives. If you're not prepared to act, please leave the Senate. And above all, leave the federal government in terms of key officials, because you'll only make a mess of things. It'll be worse with you there than if you just simply got out and left it to a minority to solve this problem. But there are 2 things that must be done. Let's start with the simplest thing, which is on the table now. Remember, the impeachment's in the background. But impeachment is not the issue. The impeachment is getting Cheney out. You get Cheney out now, and the situation can be made manageable. If you do not get Cheney out, you're kissing civilization goodbye. If it survives, it's no good, not to your credit. And any congressman who says he's not going to get Cheney out now should leave the premises now as a final act of decency. It's Nancy Pelosi and others. If they can't get Cheney out now, if they're not determined to do it now, this month, before they leave Washington, they should quit now. Submit their resignation and let somebody who's more competent come in. because it has to happen. Cheney has to go. The impeachment process is not the process by which we get rid of Cheney. The process by which you get rid of Cheney is a number of gentlemen and ladies meet and tell this jerk that he's gone voluntarily. It'd be his best option. Get him out of there. Break the command structure. Isolate the idiot in the White House. He then becomes manageable. As long as Cheney's in there, he is not manageable. He has no brains, he has no intelligence, he has no judgment. He's a fool. But he was put into the presidency because people who put him there knew he was a fool. They put him under the supervision of Cheney as his babysitter. Get Cheney out. Cheney is tied to the evil. I could go more into that. But this is what has to happen. Now, the first thing we're going to have to do, we're going to have to make a decision right away to pull back the U.S. troops in the Southwest Asia. We have to pull them back into holding positions. The fundamental thing we have to do, and it won't work by itself, the holding position means you're pulling the United States troops out of the conflict into holding positions. Therefore, you are changing the position of the U.S. troops from combatants and the issue and the target to a factor in which a group of nations will make the decision to solve the problem. That, from a military and strategic standpoint, a diplomatic standpoint, will work. It can be done. The algebra is known. A number of specialists have presented the algebra. It will work. As far as emotion concerned, as mechanics will work. But it won't work by itself. Not because it's not a good idea, not because it's not a workable idea, because politically it's not adequate. You have to come up with something more. You have to come up with a group of nations, a group of powers, who recognize that the instability of this region is a threat to the continuation of civilization. And therefore, a remedy has to be forced through. And only when a dominant group of nations say, we agree, we are going to take the concerted power of our nations and insist that this happens, there will be no resistance. It will happen. We're going to have stabilization in this region. This means what I proposed earlier. It cannot be done unless we induce the idiot who's under adult supervision in the White House, without Cheney, to carry forth on what was started at Kennebunkport. Move in that direction, an inclination to move in that direction. Get Cheney out and go back into the Kennebunkport posture. At that point, the President of the United States, or the office of the President of the United States, has to make an offer to Putin, and Putin will, without question, accept the offer. And that is to build a coalition immediately in the context of moving these troops, U.S. troops, away from the area of conflict, where all they are is targets there. They're not accomplishing anything except being targets. If you want them to be targets, keep them there. The only function they're performing right now is as targets. Get them out of the target range. All right, now if we approach Russia and Putin, Putin will accept the offer. If the United States government proposes to President Putin that the United States, Russia, China, and support of India become a sponsoring committee to build immediately a group among nations who are going to address these global problems which have to be dealt with immediately. Because smaller nations, individual nations, can't do it. You have to change the world monetary financial system immediately. And you cannot do that with a couple of small nations. You can only do that from the top. You have to pull together the might of the world, the major powers of the world, and those who will support them, and say we're going to change immediately the world monetary system. We're going to get rid of the floating exchange rate monetary system. We're going back immediately to a fixed exchange rate system. Because if we do not go back to a fixed exchange rate system of the Franklin Roosevelt prototype, then there's no possibility of preventing a general collapse and disintegration of the world economies. It can't be done. Therefore, you have to have a power group which says, we're going to save this planet from hell. One of the things we're going to do, which is the trigger point, is to get something done in Southwest Asia, to get the U.S. troops out of the target range and pull them into a holding position where they become a factor in negotiating the peaceful reconstruction of the region. That will not work by itself unless you have a power group which includes 4 powerful nations of this planet and others who decide that that's going to work. A power group which agrees that we're going back to a fixed exchange rate system by government degree as made by governments in concert. We're going to stop the floating exchange rate system. We're going to take steps to clean up the financial mess. Most of the financial claims and the financial assets and obligations in the world today are worthless. You have play money. You have the stock market is a fraud. The Treasury Department is committing a fraud. Most governments are committing fraud. And the British government is the worst of them all. The British government and the British system is the worst offender that we have to deal with on this planet. They organized this war. They organized most of the evil that's done in the world today. So they will not be considered as having any veto rights in this matter. But the major powers are going to say we're going to have to go back to a fixed exchange rate system. We're going to do it immediately by treaty agreement, by signed agreement among countries. We're going to freeze a lot of things, but we're going to make sure that things that have to be paid, things that have to go on, will go on. That production is not cut, farming proceeds, food is produced, infrastructure is built, so forth. And we'll have to build our way out of this process by steps, which begin with these measures. And the measure is a matter of the will of a powerful group of nations, not just the 4, but a powerful group of nations which agree that this has to be done because hell on earth has to be prevented. And that's the only way it's going to happen. And therefore, to do this, we must remove Cheney. Anyone who is not prepared to remove Cheney should immediately leave any official position in the U.S. government, right now. And they should be told to leave. They should be impeached, hounded out of office, or whatever is necessary. Get them out of there. They're an impediment. Because we're going to return this government in particular to its people. And you see what's happened with the contempt which the leaders of the Congress have shown toward the people. The contempt they've shown toward the majority of elected representatives in the Congress, toward the majority of people out there who are the constituents. What right do they have to say they represent the people when they're against the people? The people want us out of Southwest Asia. And anyone who's not prepared to do that is not going to have a hearing with the great majority of the American people. More than 3/4 of the Democrats insist on this. More than half of the Republicans insist on this. Others will insist and join it en masse if they think it has a coon's chance of surviving. That's what they want. When you say you're going to get us out of that mess in Southwest Asia, as even the New York Times said today in an editorial column, when the American people hear that we are determined to actually get out of that mess in Southwest Asia, then, and only then, will the American people respond with confidence to their government. If you don't do that, you're worth nothing. You should get out of office. You're an impediment. You're an embarrassment. For the sake of your descendants, get out of office. Don't disgrace them any further. They got enough trouble. They got enough trouble with the debt you've left to them with, on top of everything else. So that's the general outline of the situation. So you have to, on the one hand, if you don't take the drastic action, get out now. Nobody's going to listen to you. You're a fool. Shut your mouth. Don't want to hear what. Don't bother us with your babble anymore. Secondly, that's not going to work by itself. But that opens the door for something else. It opens the door for the President of the United States under adult supervision, without Cheney, going to Putin and saying, we need this. I guarantee you that reading the situation in Russia, Putin will say yes. The United States will say to China, and Putin will say to China, we want you in on it. Yes. China will say yes, because China has a number of problems which I understand very well. And they will say yes. You speak the right way. In terms of India, India will be somewhat reluctant because it was too long under British influence. And they have to get rid of some of that problem. But nonetheless, India is seeing what's happening with the Pakistan destabilization. And Indian leaders who understand what that means are going to say, yes, we too have a problem. We're being used as a cat's paw in respect to Iran. The Pakistan situation is a cat's paw in respect to Iran. It's a cat's paw on those who are determined to destroy India too. And Indian patriots don't like the United States, particularly with the current treaty proposals being shoved down their throat. India will go along in an Indian way. It's not the same thing as China. China is simpler. China says they're going to do it, they're going to do it. All right, now 4 powers on this planet agree that we're going to sponsor this type of approach to getting out of the mess which has been created in the world today, and saying the British have to be put under adult supervision. Then we can begin to do certain things. Now, the big problem we have to deal with, as I mentioned before, is the economic, financial, monetary crisis. The United States is disintegrating. If a depression occurs, the United States will see conditions you won't believe. Nothing in the past century, no depression, was comparable to what will hit the United States if this system collapses now. We don't have industry. We have destroyed our agriculture. We've destroyed our healthcare system. We've destroyed almost everything that we depended upon. And if we lose the power of money, which we're about to lose, as long as the US dollar was around, and as long as world affairs were denominated in US dollar exchanges, we had a certain strength in this world. Not because we were worth anything, we weren't worth anything. We threw that away a long time ago. But we were worth something because the US dollar was in effect a reserve currency of the world. Why? Because the currency of China depended upon the value of the US dollar. The currency of many countries depended upon the value of the US dollar. The debts were denominated in dollars. And as long as we were respectable, people would respect us and treat us nicely because they were afraid of the collapse of the US dollar. Once the US dollar is collapsing, we ain't nothing no more. Right now. Therefore, we have to put the US dollar under a fixed exchange rate system again. And if we have to start to rebuild what we've destroyed. We have to take what was being shut down, the auto industry, put these hedge funds out of business, foreclose them, they're all swindlers anyway. Start to rebuild the infrastructure capacity, the high-tech infrastructure capacity, which existed in Michigan, in Ohio, in Indiana, in other places that we've destroyed. Build up our infrastructure, our mass transportation systems. Restore the growth of our agriculture. Go back to a high-tech economy again, not a baby boomer economy, not a synthetic diaper economy. And therefore, if we do not mobilize to go away from what has happened to us since 1968, to get away from the 68er mentality, to get away from zero growth, to get away from post-industrial society, to go back to high tech, to proliferate nuclear power. We need it. I mean, the future of humanity is nuclear power. You want fresh water? You need nuclear power. We're just about to unleash a prototype of a nuclear plant which is specifically designed to also make not only fresh water for us, but to make fuels, hydrogen-based fuels, made synthetically from water. And the world is going to go to 800 to 1,000 megawatt power units, which are of a new type, a fourth generation type, which are efficient for producing fuels from water, hydrogen-based fuels, whose waste product is water. Much better than coal, much better than anything else. And certainly better than using up our food supply to starve people to death so we can run automobiles, which don't function. So therefore, we're going to back to the American system. We're going back to an image of the United States as if we had remembered Franklin Roosevelt and what he did in the 1930s. What he did in the United States saving the world from Hitler. Because without us, without Franklin Roosevelt, Hitler would have won. The British would have joined him. They already had joined him. They created him, after all. So therefore, we have to go back to that image. The world needs it. Let's take the case of China. China has a population of 1.4 billion people. And India has 1.1. Now, people think China is very wealthy. It's not true. There's some wealthy people in China. There's some industries in China which are important. But also the majority of the population of China is extremely poor. And therefore, without a revolution in technology affecting the infrastructure and so forth of the masses of China, the massive area, China has not got a future. Therefore, we have to think about that. We have India. We have probably 70% of the population of India, even though about 30% of the population of India, 1.1 billion people, is in fair shape. The majority is in worse shape than ever before. They're short of water, they're short of everything. They're short of the conditions of life. They need development. All of Asia needs development. Desert areas need development. So we have to go into a period of high-tech, nuclear fission-driven growth in basic economic infrastructure. One example, one case which we just had some agreement on in terms of the Bering Strait tunnel project. If we proceed, and my proposal, of course, is magnetic levitation, to build this tunnel, which connects this tip of Siberia with Alaska. Now, if we do that, and preferably if we use magnetic levitation as the mechanism, we build a line which runs throughout Europe along the route of what Mendeleev designed as the Trans-Siberian Railroad. We run a line down through Canada, through the United States, through the Isthmus of Panama, down into South America. We run the other line through the so-called Middle East, Southwest Asia, into Africa, and build trunk lines. If we do that, we can build a transportation system which has certain very interesting characteristics. First of all, it's fast. 200, 300 miles an hour. How do you like that? That's good enough, isn't it? It's a lot cheaper than air flight, a lot more efficient, and it can carry more people and does the job. And no airport jam-ups. It's also for freight. If we can have an efficient system of moving people and freight across borders, across continents, the continent of Eurasia, the continent of the Americas, the continent of Africa. If we do that, we will have transformed this planet. If we do this with nuclear power and go on to developing thermonuclear fusion, develop technologies, including the management of the supply of our periodic table for the needs of humanity, we have then a prospect of a 50-year recovery program, because we're talking a lot of very long-term investment in very capital-intensive, heavy works, among other things. And these are like large river systems, water management systems, power systems, all these types of things are of 25 to 50 years investment. Some are longer. We have to change the character of the planet in terms of fresh water supplies and things of that sort. So we have a 50-year perspective before us if we start it now properly, and we have some very good ideas about what to do. We can begin to reverse the post-industrial society, and that's what we have to do. We're suffering from an ideology of post-industrial society. Now let's go back one step on this. Why post-industrial society? Why did this disease of post-industrial society come about? We have a famous play by a great author, Aeschylus. We had 3 parts, a trilogy, but the middle part is the one you focus on, Prometheus Bound. You have this evil bastard, the god Zeus, Olympian Zeus, who proclaims to Prometheus, who's been taken captive, that he is going to be tortured. You can't kill him because he's immortal, but you can torture him forever. It's sort of a Guantanamo effect. And that he's going to be tortured because he committed the crime of lifting mankind above the level of animals by allowing human beings to know how to use fire to improve the human condition. That's the crime that Zeus condemned Prometheus for. We have lived in this world, for most of what we know of it, under the influence of what's called an oligarchical model. Sometimes it's called the Persian model in the times of the ancient Greeks, but it's generally known as the oligarchical model. The oligarchical model is typified in European history by the Spartan model in Greece. It's typified by the Roman Empire. It's typified by the Byzantine Empire. It's typified by the Venetian system, the alliance of Venetian bankers with Norman chivalry, which is a form of empire. And it's typified today by the Anglo-Dutch liberal system, which has pretty much run most of the world increasingly since about February of 1763, when the British defeated the French and some others and used a war in Europe to make Europe impotent. And the British East India Company, not the British monarchy, but the British East India Company ran India as a colony with a private army as a colony, not the British monarchy, but the British East India Company. The British East India Company ran a war against China. And they did all these kinds of things. And today the British East India Company exists in the form of the BAE, which is being investigated for its connections to what happened in 9/11. It's the one capability of this planet that could have done 9/11, and probably did. So this empire, this oligarchical system, and the oligarchy does not like a republican state. It does not like a state in which the society's policy is based on raising the productive powers of humanity through science and technology and the use of that to transform the planet, to raise the standard of living, to raise the knowledge, to elevate man, but rather like something out of a nightmare of Cannae, is to have peasants who are treated as cows on the estate, on the assumption that the profit of the estate, as Cannae specified, and Adam Smith admired him for this, the profit of the state is due to the magical powers of the ownership of the title to nobility. So you pay your peasants who work on the farm on the basis that you support your cows until you decide to slaughter them. You know? But you don't give them any more. You don't give them any credit for creating wealth. You treat them like cattle. It's the oligarchical society. Whereas somehow the magical powers of ownership bestow upon the owner the riches which are produced by society. The oligarchical model. So the historical struggle of humanity is centered around the struggle, at least in known history, the struggle for the republic, in which the commonwealth, the well-being of mankind in society as a whole, is the standard of government, the standard of policy, as opposed to government and the masses of people as an object of convenience for a few wealthy or otherwise powerful landowners or people owners. And that's the struggle. That's the meaning of the Roman Empire. That's the meaning of the Byzantine Empire. That's the meaning of the Venetian chivalry system. That's the meaning of the British Empire. And that's the meaning of every petty tyrannical regime which has ever cursed this planet. And therefore the issue is the nature of man, the nature of the human individual. Is the human individual an animal who simply has dog-like characteristics or cow-like characteristics, certain species characteristics given by a biological endowment? Or is mankind the human mind? Is mankind the creative being that Zeus hated? The individual who can create, discover universal physical principles and apply the knowledge of these principles to change the condition of life of humanity and to conquer man's problems as a whole. Is the individual sacred? Is the individual human being different than a mere animal? Do we have the kind of society which fosters that fact and bases relations within society on the basis of the knowledge that the human individual is not an animal, but has a power of reason, a power of discovering universal physical principles and artistic principles, which no animal can do? And that we desire a society, a form of society, which we call a republic or a commonwealth, in which the well-being of all of the people in society and their descendants will have a constantly improved condition of life, a constantly improved realization of the meaning of their life in the eyes of their grandchildren and great-grandchildren and so forth to come, and of other nations too. And that's what the struggle is about. That's why the change came with Roosevelt's death. Roosevelt represented that principle. He's the epitome of that principle. And for that reason, people like Felix Powhatan hate him. There was a meeting in the spring of 2005. As you may recall, I had some success in sparking the Democratic Party and others to lead in the defense of Social Security against George W. Bush. And we had a very successful mobilization in that respect. We did save the Social Security system. But unfortunately, beginning the spring of 2005, my fellow Democrats deserted one side of the cause. They continued to defend Social Security. But we'd also raised the question we had to defend the birthright of the nation as represented by its automobile industry, not simply for making automobiles, but for making all kinds of things, like rebuilding river systems and so forth, which that industry, because of its tool-making capacity, had provided us during World War II and so forth, and still could. We had a rotting system in the United States, and we, the members of Congress, allowed this capacity, this idle capacity of the automobile industry, which is the machine tool sector, the infrastructure building capacity. We allowed that to be disassembled and destroyed instead of fixing up what had happened in Katrina in Louisiana and so forth, instead of fixing our rivers, instead of fixing our transportation system, instead of restoring our healthcare system. We destroyed a precious part of our capabilities as a nation of taking care of our own needs. Who did it? Leadership of this came from the Democratic Party. There was a meeting at which the subject was me. The meeting was organized by Felix Powhatan, who's a fascist. He's a guy who played a key role in putting Pinochet into power in Chile, which tells you what his character is. If you know what he did in Big Mac in New York, you know what his character is. The guy's a fascist, together with George Shultz and people of the same type. And this guy, his argument was very clear at this meeting. His argument was, we don't want a LaRouche. Why? Because LaRouche is like Franklin Roosevelt, and we don't want another Franklin Roosevelt. We have to stop another Franklin Roosevelt. So the Democratic Party, in which Felix Powhatan considers himself a controller of, moved to sideline what I was doing. backed off. And you saw the result. The Democratic Party participated in condoning a takeover of the Supreme Court, or near takeover, by a fascist organization called the Federalist Society. The fascist organization is built around the ideas of Carl Schmitt, the man who designed the Hitler dictatorship. Now, are they Nazis? Of course they're Nazis. It's just like the Bank for International Settlement. It's a Nazi institution, too. That's how the thing was organized. So we're back at it. And Pinochet's a Nazi. Pinochet's also a part of the British organization, the BAE. He's dead now, but he's still a part of it. Now his deadness makes him much more confirmed part of that tradition. Who else? George Shultz created that monster also. Others created it. Pinochet not only was Nazi in his thinking, but under his government, with the backing of Shultz and with the participation of Verhappen, ran Operation Condor, which was a genocide operation in the southern cone of South America, which was run by a third generation of the Nazis, who were imported for that reason. This is what we're dealing with. You say, why is it that Nazis are bad? Well, it's not just Nazis are bad. Nazis are a product of the belief in oligarchical society. Look back in history. What did the Roman legions do? They ran extermination operations against populations too. That was their method. Exterminations as a method of controlling society. They ran the gladiator system, didn't they? What is that? The same thing. So the problem is you have a mentality which is loose, which is typified by Felix Verhappen, and Felix is treated as respectable in the Democratic Party. He may not have a swastika, no Hakenkreuz on his sleeve, but he has one in his heart. That's what he does. Look what he does. Look at Big Mac in New York. It was a swindle. Highway robbery. They looted the city. They wanted to get the human beings out of there. And you had to conceal your membership in the card of the human race and just so you were very rich and you could live in New York City. Or unless you came in as slave labor or something to maintain things. But the problem here is this ideological problem which permeates the society. We have, for example, look at the United States and look what's happened to it since 1970-71. Look at what has happened to the lower 80% of the income brackets, family income brackets of our households, as opposed to earlier under Roosevelt, in that Roosevelt tradition. Look around the world at systems. What do you see? The objective physical conditions of life, the conditions necessary for human qualities of life, of our people, the lower 80%, has been collapsing at an accelerating rate since 1977. Collapsing consistently. There's been no prosperity in the United States, not for the lower 80% of family income brackets. Anyone who says so is a fool or a liar. Everything is worse. Look at health care. Look at the cost of housing. Look at the quality of education. For the lower 80% of the family income brackets of the United States, everything has become consistently worse. And the means by which we had a higher standard of living was destroyed as part of the program of the Rockefeller Trilateral Commission. This policy destroyed the United States. It destroyed our agriculture, destroyed our industry, destroyed our infrastructure. It was continued under the Reagan administration. It was accelerated under the Bush 1 administration. Clinton wasn't onto it yet. He didn't understand it yet. Bill Clinton probably now does understand it, but he didn't understand it when he was president. He thought that he made the mistake of thinking that Al Gore was human. That's a big mistake. Remember the coal mine, right? 16 tons in the company store? Al Gore owned that place that got that song written about it. That's Al Gore. The guy's no good. And he comes from a background of a dad, he was no good either. It's something that came out crossbred with a possum up in the swamps of Tennessee. You know how they are. Anyway, so that's the problem. Is a cultural problem. Is our people have come to accept the idea of an oligarchical model in society, even in these United States. We accept the injustice which is heaped upon the lower 80% of our income brackets. We accept the injustice that's done in many other ways to our own people. We set in awe about the upper 3% of family income brackets in the United States. We kiss the butt of some millionaire who's nothing but a thief, or billionaire who's nothing but a thief. That's what we do. We have destroyed the idea of the Commonwealth. We destroyed what we prize when we build our Constitution in terms of Solon of Athens. We tore apart and disregarded every tradition, noble tradition of humanity, particularly of European civilization. And that's what we've done. And we've come to accept that. We've come to accept politicians who think like that. We've come to accept laws that practice that. We look at other nations in that way. We don't think as we should, as we used to as Americans. We used to think of how we came here. Like I can say some of my ancestors came here in the early 17th century into Massachusetts and related areas as colonists. People came here with the original settlements. Didn't flee from Europe in the sense of having to escape of the place. Some people did fit that category, but that wasn't the way the colonies were built. The settlements were built by people who represented the best of European culture, but an anti-oligarchical sense of European culture. People came here because they were looking for a place in which to take the best of European civilization and move it out of Europe, where Europe was dominated by oligarchical traditions, to build a true republic based on the Commonwealth model, which had repeatedly been tried in Europe, particularly beginning of the 15th century, but had repeatedly failed because of the return of the old oligarchical forces. You still represent nobility. You bow before nobility, even to this day in Germany. You bow to nobility, the black nobility in Italy, even to the most degenerate people you can imagine. The same thing goes on in France. There are more policemen than there are people. This is Europe. Europe is permeated with oligarchical culture. Look, you have these two Polish twin idiots in Poland, and the Polish put up with this crap. And therefore we came here, the founders came here, to bring the best of European culture here, to build a nation, to be a cynosure for the nations of the world as the model republic, the way that humanity should live. This is what is built into our Constitution. This is what is built into our Declaration of Independence. These are the ideas of Leibniz and people like that. This is what Lincoln did. And we've always had a struggle in our country between the oligarchical tendencies coming in, chiefly from Britain, into the United States, as in New York City and so forth. But we had a republic. And in the case of Franklin Roosevelt found us in a low moment. We'd lost 30% of our standard of living, our income, in a short 4-year period. And he led in rebuilding our nation, which was shattered. Not rebuilding our nation, but moving to preserve this and extend this, to eliminate colonies and similar kinds of oppression throughout the world, to promote a world based on republics, sovereign republics, which are each dedicated to serving their own people by Republican standards and promoting Republican standards of life among people of other nations, knowing that our security and our well-being and our purpose in living depended upon what we did to promote these kinds of ideas and these kinds of opportunities among other peoples, the same rights that we desired for ourselves. We have turned away from that. This happened at the end of the war. Roosevelt died. Truman, who was a little bit of a pig, came in. Yeah, he was. I was there. And I saw the curly tail myself. So figuratively speaking, of course. But he turned away. The United States joined with Churchill and other Brits in restoring colonialism. We took the Japanese troops out of the prison camps in Indochina, where they had surrendered to a force organized by the United States. Ho Chi Minh was an asset of the United States, an ally of the United States in the freeing of Indochina from colonialism and from the Japanese. The Japanese were put into prison camps. The ever-loving British came in, armed the Japanese, and told them to get out and take over the country until the British could get the French in there to replace them. We restored colonialism in Southeast Asia. The Dutch went in and conducted a long war to suppress independence in Indonesia. This happened throughout the world, in that form and various forms. This was the Anglo-American policy, which is what Truman represented. This is what Eisenhower understood when he gave a speech at the end of his term as president. He understood what had taken over the United States. He gave it a name, military-industrial complex. But military-industrial complex was what was unleashed on the day that Franklin Roosevelt died, when Truman took over. And the thugs who had been originally, like the grandfather of the present president of the United States, who had been one of the people who put Hitler into power in Germany. This crowd took over power in the United States under Truman. And we haven't gotten rid of it since. So we have in the United States a tendency of this oligarchical tendency of preferring an oligarchical society in which a few of the rich, the beautiful people, they're ugly as hell. I mean, you see the way they dress and the stuff they bear at parties. Oh, disgusting. Anyway, so that's what's happened to us. So therefore, there's a factor in a rottenness in our culture, which the baby boomer generation was brought into. And that's another story in itself, which I've told many times. So we've come to the point that we have a way of choosing. We can choose to do what I proposed, which from a strategic standpoint is the only sequence of major developments which would get the world out of what would otherwise be a plunge into a dark age, something comparable to the 14th century in Europe. We could do that. We turn to our character, as Franklin Roosevelt once did earlier, under conditions of crisis. And what I'm proposing could only be done, admittedly, under conditions of crisis. Only when these guys get down on their knees and people admit that this isn't working, that this is a danger to human life, and they have no choice, no acceptable choice but to do what I say on this one, then they will choose it. And they will be happier. That's the only chance for humanity. Without the United States, it can't happen. Europe couldn't do it. Asia couldn't do it. We must be the spark plug. That is our destiny. That's our legacy. Not to rule the world, but to be the spark plug by which the world comes to rule itself. We have to be the spark plug. We have to say, we're going to pull our troops back unilaterally. We're offering everybody. We're getting out. We'll take the U.S. troops, we'll move them part of them out of Iraq City into the airport. We'll move them into other holding positions. We're not here to shoot, nor to be targets. Now we created a mess for you, haven't we? Okay, good. Now you guys, get yourselves together. We're going to bring this fighting to an end. We're going to bring this to an end. Then we turn around, knowing that won't work by itself. Then we go to Putin, the President of the United States, whose one redeeming feature is he seems to like Putin, or something. I don't know. You never know, I understand exactly why or what goes on in that funny mind, if there is a mind at all. But this is one thing he seems to do, and we encourage that, because it's the only, not because it's very good, but it's the only virtue we can find in the guy. So he goes to Putin and says, we, the United States, need your cooperation. We've got to cooperate and get these Brits under control. Which Putin will say, that's a very good idea. And we've got to have China involved in this. Putin will say, yes, that's true. And India has to be involved. He'll say, that's good, that's good. Better balance. And then 4 of the most powerful nations on this planet agree that what we're doing in Iraq and pulling back is the right thing to do. But it's not sufficient, because we have a world financial crash coming down. It's fully in progress. Therefore, we have to act also together in unity to take certain emergency measures which will stabilize the situation and enable us to organize our way out of this mess. If we do that, you will find that Germany will probably be the first to desert Britain on this kind of thing. They love it, because the Germans are really getting sodomized by the British. And they really, despite appearances, they don't like it. The Italians will laugh and say, ah, and they will be happy. The French will say, But what will happen is you will find very rapidly, immediately, and if we solve this problem, we take this whole area of Southwest Asia, which is now a terrible crisis area, and we say this thing is going to be settled. Peace is going to come here now. It'll happen. It will happen. Because one of the things that feeds the problem in this region, in particular, is the fact that it's a region of injustice. And the Saudi royal family is not an asset. I tell you, it's not an asset in this area. They have their own agenda, and people like Prince Bandar are really a menace. So, but in this area, if we get this kind of agreement, we can bring peace in the Middle East. It'd be tough, but with that combination of power, we can do it. Because we will end the injustice. We will present a plausible, clear alternative to perpetuation of the injustice. And by our initiating that, initiating the measures which bring this about, we will give the United States back a position of moral leadership in the world.